Hello and welcome to Woke Watch, and today I am genuinely both sad and angry that the disease of wokeness, fighting its way through society like an aggressive cancer, has now affected something which was very important in my childhood in such a way that future generations won't be able to experience it in the same manner. The works of one of the greatest authors of all time are being given a woke update. Born in 1916 in Cardiff to Norwegian parents, so Norway and Wales come together, as a child his accent must have been amazing. In the Second World War he became a fighter pilot, then an intelligence officer, rising to the rank of wing leader. He wrote 2 autobiographies, both of which I've read, several successful screenplays, short stories and novels for adults, but he's best known for his work in children's literature. The late, the brilliant Roald Dahl. Like millions of children around the world, I grew up reading the works of Roald Dahl, and his genius was to tell these fantastic, imaginative stories, which were often very macabre, unsympathetic, full of dark humour, in a way that he could engage with his child audience without speaking down to them, and carry the moral message that if you're a good, kind person, you will triumph over adversity. But the publishing house that owned these novels, which is owned by fucking Netflix, so of course they've got to woke it up and tick every diversity box, they were employing sensitivity readers to go through every novel, word for word, and change anything that could be deemed offensive by the standards of the 2020s. Now bear in mind, these books were written in the 70s and the 80s. Dahl died in 1990. So of course the values and standards won't be exactly the same. But if they left them alone, we could use them to teach future generations on how far we've come. My favourite Roald Dahl book was Matilda, the story of a little girl, the only good person in her family, who developed psychic abilities. And again, Netflix, where did you get the idea for 11 from? Although, whilst I'm saying that, Millie Bobby Brown just turned 19, she's growing up nice. But in the new version of Matilda, she isn't a little girl, she's a little child. Because there are no boys and girls in the rewrite of Matilda, because God help us if children knew what sex they were. Not only that, the villain of the piece, Miss Trunchbull, who Dahl described as a formidable female, is now a formidable woman. And why the reason for that change? Well, I think it's because female is something which cannot be disputed. But in 2023, I can put a fucking dress on and say I'm a woman, and everyone has to go stunning and brave. So Miss Trunchbull could be a trans woman. So for the next generation of kids who read that novel, they don't know if Miss Trunchbull has a cock. Roald Dahl's most famous book is probably Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It was made into 2 films, one in the 1970s with Gene Wilder, which was brilliant, and then one in the early 2000s with Johnny Depp, which was utter dog shit. But in the book, the Oompa Loompas are described as a tribe of African pygmies who Wonka brought back to the UK. Now that hasn't aged very well. But in the original, they were called small men. In the new version, they are small people, because God help us if anyone knew what gender they were. Not only that though, but their origin story has been completely removed. So it doesn't make any sense. It looks like Willy Wonka openly discriminates against anyone over 3 feet tall working for him. In the same novel, Augustus Gloop, the tubby German, who was described as fat, is now described as enormous, because fat is associated with body shaming. These woke idiots are completely missing the fucking point. He falls into a river of chocolate because he's done in by his own gluttony. And the rest of the boys and girls, sorry children, they do the same thing. It's the thing that makes them terrible that takes them out of the running. The only one who doesn't is Charlie, because he's the only child who acts selflessly. This isn't fucking difficult. In James and the Giant Peach, the Cloud Men are now called the Cloud People. But given that Netflix owns the publishing house, I'm surprised they didn't do all 72 made up fucking genders. In the Twits, Mr. and Mrs. Twits are now no longer allowed to be called mad or crazy, because that could be seen to be discriminating against people with mental health problems. These are books for children. In The Fantastic Mr. Fox, the whole novel has had to be toned down so that it doesn't alarm children with the threat of cruelty to animals. How mollycoddled do these kids need to be? They will never function in the outside world. Finally, well finally for me anyway, because I gave up reading the article, we get to the BFG. One of the most beloved children's books of all time. The only issue I have with it is the title, The Big Friendly Giant, because he's only half the height of the other 9 giants. So he's the small friendly giant. I digress. So what's wrong with this story? Well, if we go over the plot very quickly, it centres around an 8-year-old orphan called Sophie, who's actually based on Sophie Dahl, the supermodel, who's the granddaughter of the late Roald Dahl. She sees a giant in the street and he tries to hide from her. Realising he's been seen, he takes her back to the island he lives on and explains that he is the friendly giant. The others, right, this isn't an issue for young children. The other 9 giants travel around the world eating human beings. So the prospect of being eaten alive, that doesn't traumatise kids apparently. Nor is it that the BFG captures dreams and blows them into the ears of good children. So a big bloke creeping around children's bedrooms at night, that's fine as well. Please sit down and we'll go through the issue. In one scene in the novel, a character is described as being white from fear. Now, we all know what that means. When people go pale when they're frightened, it's because the fight or flight response is kicked in, controlled by a part of the brain called the amygdala. The blood rushes from our faces because it's being sent to our muscles, and the body is flooded with adrenaline to deal with injuries. It's a very primal part of our brain. But these woke fucking numpties are saying white from fear is actually racism. And it doesn't end there. Because whilst the BFG goes out delivering dreams, he wears a black coat to keep himself hidden. But now apparently just saying that the coat is black is a form of racism. If you wear a black coat, you're a racist. That means I'm pretty much fucked. Also, I'm a metalhead, so just about all my clothing is black. So, before I return home and tell my Irish wife to go back to where she bloody comes from, because apparently I'm a racist and so's everyone else I know, I have a question. If Roald Dahl is seen as problematic, then why is it you can buy a copy of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler and have it here tomorrow? Because Hitler was quite a racist. You can also buy the manifesto written by the Unabomber, a convicted serial killer. And I know this because I've got it. I've actually read both of them. How is it they are not seen as problematic, but the outdoor clothing worn by a fictional giant is? As ever, thanks for watching.